Welcome to Mark Banks Photography with me, Mark Banks. In this session I'm going to discuss vignettes. What are vignettes first of all? Well, vignettes, although they can actually be used to lighten the outer edges of an image, generally they're used for darkening the edges around an image, and that's just to create the feeling of depth overall. But what they can also do is they can actually be used very cleverly to balance an image, and in this particular case this is a very soft misty scene of a Scottish loch that I took in winter, this previous winter. In this particular case, I want to use it to hem in, as it were, to frame the image, to allow the eye to look into the centre of the image. It feels a little bit as if it's escaping around the edges at this moment. Now, there's generally one particular way of using a vignette, and that's actually to use the vignette tool, which we'll start off using, and that's found in the effects panel of the develop module in Lightroom Classic. Now, in this particular case, there's three different styles available that you can choose from. You have highlight priority, you've got colour priority, and then a paint overlay. So we'll discuss those three when we get to them shortly. But equally, there's another, and probably my preferred way of using a vignette, which gives some extra clever features when creating a vignette, and we'll come to that a little later on. So we'll go with the, as it were, the official version of the vignette feature, which is, as I say, it's in the develop module under effects. So the first one is highlight priority, and as the term suggests, when I actually darken this scene down the whole outer edge, it darkens the outer edges of the scene, but generally prioritizing highlights first and not shadows. And so basically the idea is that it can darken the outer edges, but without darkening as much the shadow and darker areas of the scene, like for instance this island or peninsula on the left hand side here. But as you can see, it still does darken it down, depending on how much you actually apply as far as the amount is concerned. I'm going to set this back to default, the feather back to default, which is generally the around about the 50% marker. Now, as well as having the amount slider to play with here, we've also got a midpoint, roundness and feather options as well. And what we can do here is that with the midpoint, we can actually set where we want the start and finish of the midpoint, as it states there in the image, but it's probably easier to actually show you this with no feather at all at this stage. So if I actually take the feather all the way off, you can see that what happens is by default, and what I mean by default is by the standard midpoint setting at being at 50, then what happens is the outer edges of the vignette start top, bottom, left and right, and touch all four sides here. And quite simply, what happens is when we take the feather up, it feathers that in, as the word feather suggests. But let's just take that back off, because we've also got this midpoint, and I use this quite often, and that's actually to start the edges in a little bit further. And I usually come around about an inch or so either side, depending on the size of the image, and usually prefer to start there. It gives me a nicer starting point, I think. And then when we actually bring the feather up, and I'll just double click this feather to take it to 50%, that blends it in. Now in this particular case, this is much too much, unless it's a creative effect and you want to do to create this amount of vignette, but generally I wouldn't want it to be quite as strong as this. So I'm going to bring that back until I have what I think is quite a nice type of look there. and I'm probably happy with something like that. Now that's fine, and that, as I said, works on the prioritising the brighter areas of the image first. Equally, I have an option called colour priority, and when I select that, what that will do is it'll actually prioritise colour first before any of the tonal values itself. So if there's a lot of colour in the image, then, as I said, it will actually prioritise the colour before it prioritises tonal shade values. But for something like this image, which is a very misty type of image, I actually prefer the last one, which is a paint overlay. And what paint overlay quite simply allows me to do is, instead of darkening with bright or dark tonal values, it actually paints a grey colour, and it's actually quite a nice way of being more subtle with the way that it renders the scene. And I think it just keeps the actual value around the outside more misty and a more ethereal type of a look to the image. So, you know, that's the way that I actually would prefer to add a vignette using this feature. So those are 3 different options that you have with the vignette official vignette tool. However, what I'm also going to do is I'm just going to double click that back to 0, and I'm going to show you a different method, and that's actually using the radial filter. And with the radial filter, I've got quite a lot of options here, so we can also not necessarily just darken or lighten, if that's what we prefer to do, but we can add other things in as well from all of these different options. In this particular tutorial, I'm just going to show you how to darken, just like we've done with the vignette tool. So I'm just going to double click on the word effect, and that just resets all of these values back, so it means that I'm starting with a fresh sheet. And holding down on my command key on my keyboard, I'm going to double click anywhere on the image, and what that will do is it'll actually create a perfect, as it were, oval shape, just like we had with the official tool, vignette tool. And what I'm going to do in this particular case, I'm going to bring the feather down to about 25%. But in order to actually show you this happening, I'm going to tick this box called the Show Selected Mask Overlay. It's either O on the keyboard or ticking this box here. Now you'll notice that when I do that, it shows red mask overlay in the middle of the image. That means whatever I actually apply here in the right hand side will apply to where the red mask overlay is showing. But of course we don't want to do that. We actually want to apply it to the outer edges. So you quite simply need to untick this invert box here, and that will then apply it to the outer edge. Now I'm going to bring my feather down. I find I need to do this with the radial filter to give a similar impression to what the vignette tool is doing. So I'm quite happy with that as a feather, but of course I can come back to that and add it as I wish. So in this particular case, what I'm going to do is just release the Show Selected Mask Overlay, pressing the O key or ticking this box, just so I can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to bring the exposure down from the outside, and as you can see, just like the vignette tool, it's going to darken the edges around the outside. So it's a really nice effect. So you're doing something not too dissimilar here as what you can do with the vignette tool. However, the great trick up its sleeve here is that, again, if I just press the O key or to bring the mask overlay up, as you can see, that darkening of the outside has also darkened areas of the image which are quite dark and would therefore render them into such a dark area that you might not be able to see detail in here. But the great thing about the radial filter is we have the option of a range mask. This is something we don't really have apart from the priority options in the vignette tool. So this gives us a little bit more flexibility. So if I actually choose the luminance slider here, what that allows me to do is alter the range that I actually want to apply the vignette to. And what I'm going to basically do is tell it to ignore the shadow areas by bringing the range slider in from the left and up to the right. Basically what I'm instructing Lightroom to do is tell it to ignore the shadow areas, and as I do this you'll notice that the red will disappear from the peninsula coming out in the mid distance here. So that means it will remain all nice and relatively light in comparison. So I'm going to bring that range up, and as you can see that starts to disappear from that area, and I'm going to stop about there. So then what that means is that it's actually allowing me to darken the brighter areas like you can see here, but it's actually keeping these areas open to allow the shadows to be seen in here. Particularly important if this was to be a print. What it's also doing is doing the same. It's applying it to these rocks in the foreground here. It's not allowing it to cover those either. So again, we've got plenty of advantages here. So then when I untick the Show Selected Mask overlay box again, you can see now we've got a lovely render, and I'll just alter this to auto so we can see it without the circular guide there. And so you've got a nice render there of the darkening of the edges, which is allowing me to balance the image and stops the light from escaping, but I've still been able to keep all of the shadow details in the left hand side there. Okay, so I hope you actually found this tutorial to your advantage, and please check over my website markbanksphotography.com from time to time as I keep updating these videos and tutorials on my news and tuition pages there. Thanks very much for watching.